Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I want to talk about some cards that during GD01 were considered not viable or off meta, and now that we're in GD02 have seen their popularity rise and are near staples in the GD02 decks that we've seen kind of top in Japan and in our local scenes. So before we get into that, let's just start off with what we consider the GD02 quote unquote meta so far. Uh, Basically, red white is almost as popular now. I feel like in green white, half of my locals now is either green white or red white, and then most arguably the other two decks are green blue and then blue white, which the Rick Diaz has kind of started this whole chain off of making top end red decks viable, and same thing with blue, especially with the Epion having essentially access to 8 level 3 cost 2 blockers has kind of jump shifted this blockers meta that we can quote unquote say. So to start off, Sinanju. So Sinanju, I feel like in GD01 saw no play just based on the fact people thought, level 6 is so expensive. And by that time, I don't really get any use of that. With red white, that's completely changed this. I've seen a lot of decks run this as a 4 of. And with the during pair, this unit gains high maneuver. You don't really even need high full frontal to link this with if you don't really want to. And then again, during your turn, when this unit destroys an enemy shield area with a card with battle damage, choose one enemy, deal 2 damage to it. So essentially, what we've seen with these red white decks is they'll play Sinanju and the Cubili and essentially paying something for 2. And then when Cubili swings, she's running the risk of suppression, because this unit has a high maneuver and can clear a shield or anything like that. And then Cubili deals 2 damage to a enemy unit when linked. So essentially, you're getting a 4 ping off every single time you attack, which is kind of exploded onto the scene here. Same thing with Battle of Aces. I feel like a lot of people didn't really get the full value of Battle of Aces when we were in GD01, and now that you have a bunch of cards that just ping, a lot of decks now run this as a 4 of, opposed to what I usually saw during my locals was either this, if this card was even played, it was a 1 over a 2 of, and now it's up there with Close Combat being a 4 of. And then finally, the mining asteroid base. This is the only other 06 base I believe in the game besides the underground desert base. And I never saw this card played at all in red decks. And now that red white's taken off, people sometimes play this instead of the other red bases to kind of just keep that 6 shields, kind of run that green white staple of I'd rather have six HP base than a shield that does something when I play it down, or a base, excuse me. And then moving forward, same thing with the Aegis Gundam. This kind of saw some play in some Zaf decks in GD01, but now with Sinanju and all the other pinging you're doing, this really plays a part because you are most likely than not playing a lot more decks that play a higher end uh, unit list. So you're actually able to play this card out and see this effect. Which, if you need a reminder, here is attack. If this unit has 5 or more AP, choose one enemy unit that is level 5 or higher, deal 3 damage to it. So essentially, late game, you can have a scenario here where you have Cubili or Sinanju on field, and you're potentially dealing 5 damage or potentially more every single time, which clears about 90% of units in the game, I feel like, especially if you're pairing it with Close Combat or Battle of Aces. Then we have the Shenlong. Just because we're in a blocker meta here, I feel like breach decks have kind of rose on popularity as well, and even some green white decks are running the Shenlong Gundam to help in the mirror or in a red white matchup, which is just good. I mean, this card has breach 4, which is really good, and then also without having to link it or pair it, attack, choose one enemy with blocker that is level 3 or lower, destroy it. Most blockers you'll see nowadays is either the Rick Diaz or Gundam Lifrith, so that's really good in this case where you just have to swing it and you can just immediately delete it, right? Not much has to be done in there. And then also if you're linking this with a Wu Fei, you can potentially swing in the shield. They block with one of their Lifriths or Rick Diaz. You don't take any damage, and then also you delete the other one if they have another one on board, which kind of helps just clear the board of blockers. Which I feel like a lot of my local scene now is just half the game is just blocker pass, play blocker pass, play blocker pass until eventually someone does something. And then another card I've kind of seen rise on my local scene is the Strike Rouge. Just being a cheaper Archangel, and since so many people are running blockers, just paying that one extra cost to swing on a blocker and then restand it to kind of help defend. I've seen this, usually run at a 2 or 3. I have seen some people run a 4. I think that's way too much. But this was definitely a card I did not see during GD01, which now I feel like there's a good chance if I'm playing a white deck, this is what I'll see in there. In conclusion, I think people are trying to find other ways to get around the blocker meta, which is why we've seen the rise of Sinanju and the Aegis Gundam, and again like the 6 HP base and stuff like that in Battle of Aces, of just trying to help clear blockers without having to just swing and trade off blockers. Which I'm hoping with the new starter decks in GD03, we kind of get away from this whole blocker matchup, or if there's more cards to be included that kind of help get rid of blockers or limit what your opponent can play potentially. I don't know how that looks long term. I just know that with the blocker meta, these games kind of get stale, and they get elongated out, and we're using the full timer for each round, which sometimes isn't fun, especially when you're playing 5 rounds and all your games are going to 30 minutes. It can get kind of grueling. Yeah, but that's all I had today, guys. If you enjoyed this content, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more Gundam TCG content.